Welcome to episode 2 of the Undiscovered Metric. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Tamsin James, the CMO at MSQ Partners. Tamsin has been working in the media and marketing industry for over 18 years and has been at her role at MSQ for 4 months. So, Tamsin, first things first, as a new CMO, when you're looking at analysing marketing performance, what are the real things that you're looking at and what are you looking to understand from your team?
Coming into this, I've been thinking about something that I think is really important before we dive into the detail, and that is setting the context. I believe I've built a career in agency marketing, and I strongly believe that we face some quite unique marketing challenges. So agency marketing business development hasn't always been seen as a sort of specialist area of the business in the same way that account management is, or strategy and planning, or data and insights. So it's an area of the business where people tend to kind of move into it from other parts and perhaps not necessarily understanding the complexity involved. And I think that complexity is for 3 reasons. So if you think about the breadth of the audience that we're having to communicate with at all times, that runs from clients, talent, intermediaries, industry bodies and associations, journalists, and this sort of new area of industry influencers, but don't even get me started. And that's across all areas. So MSQ is a next generation group of creative technology, media and data agencies and capabilities. So everything we're saying needs to speak to all of those different areas. And also we're global, so all geographies. And then you can break everything down. So, if you take talent, for example, existing and potential talent, those people might be your sort of traditional creatives and strategists, but they also are engineers in MSQ. So that is a really complex audience base that we are having to target and therefore measure. Yeah. And then the other thing is that marketing in agencies is still, I think, seen as revenue spending and not necessarily generating. Yeah. So our teams are lean, our budgets are small, and so it's a case of how do you run a marketing operation and measure in ways that are the most efficient and spend the least amount of budget. Yep. And for smaller companies, often there's no marketing resource at all. So it might be a founder, or it might be somebody sort of delivering part of their role, or someone really junior. And then on top of that, there's the pressure of being able to market to the same standard to that which you offer your clients. And I think sometimes the easiest thing is to step back and do the minimum for fear of being judged when you don't have that resource. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And as I've come into MSQ, 3.5 months, not 4. Sorry. Every week counts. There has been a huge amount of brilliant content generated by my team before me. We're a really fast growing group. Yeah. And when you grow fast, you don't necessarily grow evenly. So I mean that from behind the scenes. So coming in, what I'm looking at are the gaps and the opportunities. Luckily, in terms of that measurement piece, because if it was the other way around and everything was beautifully measured and we had absolutely nothing unique to say, that would be a problem. So that's the challenge that I've had, is sort of identifying what those gaps are and how we can fill them, but in the quickest and most lean and efficient way.
When it comes to being able to create that measurement framework, are you looking at sort of new ways of reporting? Are you looking at sort of certain metrics that fit into those gaps that you're looking at, or is it sort of the traditional sort of engagement rates and things like that?
Whenever you come into a new organization, and my role is new as well, yeah. I think there is, I don't know what the time is, but I think there's an amount of time where you have license to take a bit of a pause Maybe it's that whole, 30, 90 day thing, but over the last 3 months, I've built a marketing plan for the year ahead. And as part of that, I've looked at how we restructure some of the ways that we're measuring so that they are the easiest and quickest for us to get to, in order to use that measurement to course correct and improve, but not to dwell on it. We have so much to do. So I think in itself, simplicity is a metric of, or it is a sort of proof of success. If I can build something that is really simple and really easy for us to dip in and out of and get that view across all of those audiences at the same time, without getting too far into the weeds, that is success for me. So, we have historic agreements with different platforms and different partners. So I'm kind of navigating how we make the best use of what we have today, and then how we evolve so that we end up with the best fit and the most future-proofed solution. But it's a tangled web to work through.
That simplicity also probably helps with reporting upwards, because actually marketers aren't sometimes afforded the luxury of 10, 15 slides in a QBR, because they just want to know how much are we spending, how effective is our marketing. You don't have time to go into, as you say, all of those different channels.
Yes, and also I think it's about contextualizing everything.
Yeah.
So I would class MSQ as one of these new challenger groups. It's a really exciting new part of our industry. So you've got the 6 big holdcos, and then you've got businesses like ours, which have been created in recent years, and they've been created to be something different and unique and fresh for clients. And we haven't got all of that legacy stuff. And it's an opportunity to build better and more quickly, because I've come from WPP, so I've lived that life. A lot of people that are in our business have come from larger holdcos, so it's a sort of opportunity to pick the best of, but then to build things in a new and fresh way. So that's really exciting. And I think whenever I'm looking at metrics and measurement, it's about contextualizing it, because we're not the biggest and we're growing really rapidly. So how do I compare ourselves to a WPP with that in mind? And by not doing that and reporting to the C-suite and sort of ignoring some of that context, it just doesn't cut through. So it's how do you navigate growth and speed at the same time?
Yeah.
And it doesn't, the sort of, I don't know if the word's irony, but it doesn't escape me that a lot of the thought leadership that we talk about as MSQ for our own clients applies to me in my role. So we released this this piece of research and thought leadership series called Connecting the Disconnected, which was all around the challenges for C-suite marketers in today's current climate. And there's so many parts of that research that speaks to me. And one of those is about navigating all the complexity and getting buy-in from the rest of the C-suite and above, and bringing everybody on the journey with you, so that it's not like in my career, my department has been referred to as the colouring in department. Which is, it's all funny and we all laugh, but how do you really demonstrate the seriousness of what we are doing for the wider business, how it all ladders into the wider business goals? And specifically within my role now, that's, compiling all of that evidence from our agencies and then layering that up into what that means as a group.
Everyone has an opinion on marketing and feels that they have a right to say something, which I think is already a challenge. I think one of the things that we're getting to the bottom of on this podcast as well is that one of the challenges I believe marketers have had is that if we can't justify actually how we're performing, then how are we going to be taken seriously? But I think that is changing. Do you think with now that availability of data, pushing your agencies to make sure that they're all reporting in the same way, that sort of viewpoint of the marketing department is changing?
I would say, so within my role at MSQ, and then previously, the last time I was in an agency marketing role was when I was at Maxus.
Yeah.
And when you're in a central role, your agencies or your markets are effectively paying for you. You are in service to those agencies and those markets.
Yeah.
So there is this, I've always felt this sense of accountability that every penny that I spend is in some way their money that I am spending on behalf of them to help market us. So I think there's always been that sort of responsibility and accountability. I've always worked in fast growth businesses, so there's never been this infinite pot of money to just spend frivolously. So even before we were able to measure everything, that was always in my mind because of this sense of giving people value for what they, you're providing a service.
Yeah.
And I think now one of the things I'm really keen to do is just make sure that everything that we're doing offline is in some way measurable through, the way that we're doing it online. And connecting everything and just making sure that there's this sort of really simple red thread throughout everything. Just having a plan and sticking to it and making sure that you're constantly reflecting back on your original plan and where you are, keeping it really simple. I think there has always been that perception, but I think it only, specifically in agency business development, it only takes one or two massive client wins for you to be able to demonstrate the worth of what you're doing. And that's one of the things that I'm really keen to try and map out. If we're talking about new clients and new business, that we don't really call it sales, but that sort of sales cycle is really long. So we could be talking to a potential client for years before they convert. And obviously there's all the different stakeholders in between, and a client is not just one person and one type of person. You're often winning over someone within a business who then has to sell on your behalf within that business upwards. So being able to measure and track where marketing has had an impact across that entire kind of sales lifespan, resulting in multi-million, billion-dollar pitch wins at the end of it, that kind of speaks for itself. And then I'm happy to be called, I'm happy to be asked, oh, could you roll this PowerPoint in glitter for me? Because it's all fun and games, and I can make similar jokes back in response, but the seriousness and the craft of what we're doing is then seen.
For the pitch process, what's really interesting, as you described that, is actually it's almost phase one, we're marketing to this team, then actually we've done our job with that one, then we need to move to phase two, then we need to potentially actually market to the procurement team that are an entirely different department with entirely different goals, who may not necessarily get us. Is that a challenge in where you shift, or have you built that into your sort of wider marketing plan from the beginning?
Yeah, so and I can't take claim for this idea. It's been here before I started, but we actually built a whole platform called ProcureFest, which was a series of events and thought leadership to talk to that specific procurement community, because historically we feel have been sort of underloved and maybe a kind of last minute panic. Oh, we're so nearly there, but now we've got to get through procurement. I think I've heard in the past, and actually there's a rich pool of people who could become advocates for your business and your agency right there. So a lot of the work that's been done with me coming into this are these campaigns for specific types of people, and there's huge potential to do more, but that's the places where you win, really understanding all of those different groups of people, and not just sort of blasting out generic agency stuff, and not just focusing on the sort of same old industry titles, you know, thinking more broadly. We are a technology business, we need to appear in the tech press. So really sort of putting yourself in the mind of each of those people. I think agencies, I stepped out for 4 years, so I've been working in women's leadership development before I came to MSQ, and I always was looking at what was going on in our industry because we had a lot of advertising and marketing clients. But when you take a step out and you look at it from a slightly external perspective, you can kind of see some of the cliches, some of the sort of ego-led activity, the vanity around it. And I think always putting yourself in the mind of the client and what the client sees. You know, if you look at agency positioning, if I were a client receiving multiple RFIs and pitch presentations, would I be sat there thinking, oh my God, it's another one saying blah, or it's another Goosebumps film that doesn't give me goosebumps, you know? So just kind of keeping it a bit real, because I think as an industry, we have a tendency to geek out a bit about advertising and maybe forget what the purpose is, and that is to serve our clients and make their businesses successful through marketing and advertising. It's not necessarily us to become cooler and more famous for the sake of it.
Just on that, sort of those different audiences and different channels, how do you then create the metrics that everything is equal if there's a weighting on different audiences and different areas of people that you're speaking to?
When we're building our reporting, we need to put a layer of sort of nuance or context or common sense across everything. So if you take LinkedIn, for example, if we put up some piece of content on LinkedIn, I'm not looking at the number of likes, I'm looking at who has liked it and the quality of those people and the size of their networks. And if there's a post that gets 50 likes, but 3/4 of that are influential people within our industry, potential clients, existing clients, some of our own senior people. So one of the things that I feel is unique about MSQ is that we have a disproportionate number of senior people in the business who, you know, I would say probably could afford to be sat on a boat somewhere having a nice life, but they're really passionate about this industry and they're passionate about being part of something that's different and different to the bigger holdcos where they've come from. So if I get 4 of those people liking something, again, the quality of that content and the reach is significant. So I guess it's quantity and quality that I'm looking to find and measure, and also having a really clear view of where we sit amongst others in our space, because again, going back to that client view, that's what they're going to be seeing. We don't talk to people. It's rare that we talk to a client and we are the only company in the equation. We're constantly assessed side by side against our competitors. So it's really important that we know where we sit within that.
I think a lot of the time people get caught up on, especially with campaigns, of short-termism. Oh, our engagement rates dropped by 1%. We need to change the entire thing, rather than actually looking at, okay, the engagement rates dropped, but actually the audience that's engaging with this is better than it was previously. So actually we're doing something right. I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, if you don't mind, and just ask, you're obviously 3.5 months in. If there's one metric that you're going to be focusing on over the next sort of 3 to 6 months. Now, I know obviously we've talked all about contextualizing, we've talked about different audience and weighting, but if there's one thing that for the next 3 months, while you build all of this plan out, one overarching metric that sort of sits at the top of your annual marketing plan, what would it be?
One thing I would say is we're a month off of Cannes. So it would be naive of me to not mention Cannes if you're talking about the next 3 months. I think that's a really good example of something where, so we don't spend the most money, you know, compared to lots of other people, which the reason is twofold. One is we don't have that money, but also I do believe that you don't have to spend. You don't have to have the biggest, shiniest thing in Cannes. And it's such a crowded space that in order to win, you have to almost put everything in it. And I'd love to see the ROI of some of our competitors in that sense. So it's kind of, you know, because we have to, but also because we don't want to. But if I take something like that, what I am looking to do this year is measure everything. So, you know, really making sure that our CRM is working really hard for us, being able to see, okay, so we spent this much on this at Cannes, but then what did we get out of it to use across the rest of the year? Did any of those conversations in Cannes actually lead to any, you know, either existing or potential client growth? What do our own people think about us being in Cannes? Do they care? How can we demonstrate whether it actually meant anything to them? How can we be better next year? So I think that I would say in terms of metrics to focus on, it's almost kind of making sure that the main pillars of our marketing plan are delivering what they need. But for me to say one specific metric in one area when we have all those different audiences is quite hard. I mean, ultimately, as I said before, if we could win a huge global account off the back of some marketing activity, that's what I want to be able to say.
I'd be interested to get your opinion on this in terms of the role of the CMO now. Seems that not only have you got to be at the top of your game for marketing, but actually you've almost got to be VP level of chief client officer. You've got to be a VP level of sort of sales and account management. You've got to be VP in terms of technology as well, because actually you are the dotted line that goes through all of those different departments, and you are the one that is essentially answerable to that. Is that something you're seeing in the way that the CMO role has changed?
Yes. So I think in the past, so if I look back to my time at Maxus, there were moments in our growth journey where I felt like I was banging on everyone's door, or I was having to fix things that had already happened before I'd been involved. I was getting involved too late. And then when we got a new CEO in Lindsay Patterson, who like CEOs have their different areas of passion, and one of hers was marketing, luckily for me. So I think under her leadership, the culture at that level changed, and actually people, you know, people have to learn it's a behavioral change, but they learned that they needed to come to me and that I could help them make their work harder, and that I was here to help them. And coming into MSQ, I was promised that was the culture, and I was really hoping that would be the case. As a business, we talk about the fact that we deliver joined up thinking and doing, and I've been thrilled to realize that is authentic, and that is definitely what makes us unique. It's not just something slapped on a creds deck, thank God. So there is just a natural desire in everybody here to work together, and they understand that the reason for us having a group is because there are moments where if we work together and we're bigger than the sum of our parts, that has a big impact. So there's that understanding. So that is great, because I'm not banging on people's doors. They know that they need to come to me. They understand the value of packaging up their work, and for us to align on stuff, you know, from the outset rather than when it's too late. The challenge that brings is that there's a lot to do. So and you know, again, I know from our Connecting the Disconnected research that this is a challenge that our clients face as well. It's sort of like, how can you be everywhere at all times and add value equally? And also, how can you sit comfortably with being at different ends of a scale? So there are days where I need to be our biggest cheerleader. I need to be shouting about how creative we are and really stepping in front of the work and being really kind of, you know, fun and outward. And then there's other days where I need to remind people of GDPR. And it's like, how do you be the cheerleader and the fun police at the same time? So it's a constant balance, and it's a constant recalibration of energy, I guess. And also feeling comfortable with not being the expert in everything, which kind of goes back a little bit to what I said at the beginning. I genuinely believe that agency marketing is a specialist skill, and it's an art form in its own right. And part of that is being able to work with lots of experts across marketing and being comfortable with letting them be the expert at that moment, and working in partnership and being a generalist, I guess, and being comfortable with that. So, you know, if I'm working with a PR agency and they're having those day-to-day conversations with journalists, I'm happy with that because I haven't got the time. Or if I'm working with a tech partner who understands how our website is built better than I do, as long as I know enough to know what good looks like and what bad looks like, that's okay. And then with my team, making sure that we've got all of the areas covered within the team, but also empowering them to come to me and advise me. That there's no point in me knowing everything, because I just don't have the time to do that. That's why they're there. So empowering your team to hold some of that knowledge, and that's okay, and I'm okay with that. But I know others that aren't, or haven't been, or have had to learn to sit comfortably in that.
When you are looking to expand your knowledge and learn, where are the areas that you look to? What are the sources of information, and if there's anything that you would recommend to anyone to go and have a look at, or even a book to read? I know you're very passionate about sort of women leadership and have done a lot of work in that area as well.
Yeah, so book wise, I have two small children, so getting time to read a book can be challenging. And actually, again, going back to this sort of having an external view, actually in my personal life, I love my job, I love what I do, but I have a life and I switch off. And sometimes if I look on LinkedIn and see how much people have done on LinkedIn on a Sunday, I just think, can you go off and do something else for your own health? So, but I'd say where I look, I use LinkedIn as a bit of a sort of dip test of what's going on. So if you scroll through your feed a few times a day, if something's bubbling up, if there's a sort of hot topic, you'll soon know about it quickly. So there was the whole Prof G, you know, brand versus product thing the other week, and then people jumping in on that. So it's just quite helpful to understand what is the sort of current, I don't know, zeitgeist through LinkedIn, but also applying a bit of sensibility over, you know, what some of these thought leaders are saying, where they're lifting quotes from Pinterest and putting them on their LinkedIn feed. I also obviously read the industry press, again, really important, but also looking more broadly at the wider business press, and what's going on in the world, because obviously everything then rolls back and it impacts our industry. And I would say, if you ask me kind of what would be my advice, it wouldn't necessarily be a single like source, but it is look for the news behind the news. So if you see a competitor that's all over a single title in the industry press, consider whether they're paying for that coverage. Just have it, you know, putting a sense of sort of understanding why people are doing what they're doing and how they're doing it before you take it as gospel, I think is really helpful. And then with regards to women in leadership, so our industry has some brilliant organisations and associations that you can join and become members of. which is really helpful. But certainly in my own experience at Maxus, your biggest and most powerful network is the women that you work with. And as an agency, if you can turn that into something and create that community or enable that community, but with investment, ERGs are doing unpaid work, and never forget that. So as a business, you should invest in that and put proper resource behind it. But the women that I have worked with over my career are still the people that I message daily. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And when you have that deep bond, you can be yourself and you can be vulnerable in asking questions and advice. And that's really special. And again, coming into MSQ, I've got all of that behind me, and I've been really pleased to have met some brilliant women within the business who have that sense of sisterhood and spirit, and men as well. I've been really pleased with the culture and the behaviour of senior men that I work with, and the allyship. So it's all really positive. And obviously, as we know, not always the case.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.